In this episode of Student of Life with Joe Hafner, we address the question, is your culture helping you or hurting you? Joe will examine organic versus intentional culture, the characteristics of a bad culture, how to create a great personal and team culture, and much more. For show notes, links, and other resources, please visit studentoflifepodcast.com/6. That's studentoflifepodcast.com/6.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. This is Student of Life. I'm Joe Hafner, and today is a very exciting day for me because this is the 6th episode, by the way, and I'm talking about something that I think is the most overlooked thing in business and in life, that it is a force that drives you towards success or failure, and most people don't pay it much attention. And what I'm talking about is culture. Most people think about culture in terms of a business culture, but I'm going to talk today about business culture and personal culture because I believe you have to have your personal culture in line if you're the leader of a team in order for your business culture to fall into place as well. So let's get started here and talk about some things. What I want to do is kind of give you a definition. My definition of culture is your environment. It's a philosophy. When it's done intentionally, it's a philosophy about life and your business that you play out, that's played out by your team and those around you. At its worst, it's a demoralizing and destructive force. You know, it's crashing waves on your boat as you're trying to bail it out. At its best, it is an uplifting, motivating force that gives you momentum. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats and carries your team forward and gives you the ability to keep pushing and your team the ability to keep pushing. I really look at, most people don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. And culture is one of those things that if you don't pay attention to it, it's still going to come to be. If you have a team and you don't create a culture intentionally, it's going to grow organically and it's probably not going to be what you want it to be. So think of culture like a strong current in a river, and you're in a boat. Your business or your life is a boat and you are paddling down that river. If you've got a great culture, you're paddling with the current and the current's pushing you along. If you've got a bad culture, you're paddling against the current and you're fighting things you don't need to fight that are keeping you from success or the success you could have. And it's no fun. It's no fun to be in a bad culture and be fighting a bad culture. So I want to start by talking a little bit about your personal culture. And then I want to talk a little bit about, well, actually, before I get into personal culture, I want to talk about is an intentional culture versus an organic culture. Right now, these days, organic is really big. Everybody wants organic food. Organic is seen as a good thing. Well, when you're talking about culture, organic is a bad thing because organic is the kind of culture that most people in businesses have. There's no one thinking about it. There's no one putting any guardrails in place for it. And what happens is over time, an environment is created in your life, if it's personal, or in your business, if it's your business, and it's being driven by your beliefs or the beliefs of those around you. And so what happens is if you have positive, empowering beliefs, and that's your dominant focus, you're going to have a positive, empowering culture. But if the dominant focus is negative or limiting beliefs, that's going to create a negative culture. And when we talk about personal culture versus business culture, personal culture is a lot easier to shape and mold because that's all you. Your business culture, that's a little tougher because now you've got other people involved who some of them may be actually fighting against you and what you're trying to build there. But we'll get into business culture a little later. So first I want to talk about personal culture, an intentional personal culture. An intentional culture is where you think through the building blocks that create that culture and you put them into place so that you have the kind of environment and the kind of motivation and momentum in your life that you want. Have you ever seen people who just have like a dark cloud over them? They're just always negative. Everything that could go wrong does go wrong. That's someone who has a very bad personal culture. And so what they've got is, number one, they're usually speaking negative things into the world and living those negative things out. And number two, almost always someone who has that kind of demeanor and that kind of life, they have automatic negative thoughts. Or as Jim Kwik calls them, he calls them ants, automatic negative thoughts. That's where when something happens, you immediately think negatively about it. If you have an opportunity to do something, you immediately think you're going to fail. If something is coming your way that could be positive, you immediately think you're going to get the negative. And so many people allow those kinds of thoughts to dominate their mind, where they spend all their time dealing with those so that they have to overcome them. And what happens is what you feed into your mind and what you say out into the world eventually becomes your reality. Because if that's what you're always saying and always thinking, your life is naturally going to follow that progression. I love game shows because game shows give you a real kind of peek into how people think and how people act, especially in stressful situations. Because, if you're standing there with a chance to win $1 million, that's pretty stressful. So you get to see how people respond and what they're like. So I was watching Deal or No Deal with Howie Mandel, a rerun of it. And there was this woman who came on, and the first words out of her mouth were that, hey, nothing ever goes my way. I never win anything. This is awful. I'm not going to win anything today. And so that was what she said, the first thing that she said. So then as the show went on, she proceeded to prove that that's who she was. First off, she had no luck. She made all the wrong decisions. And then when she had an opportunity to make a decision that could work in her favor, she immediately chose the wrong thing. There was a point where she had a chance to win $20,000 and the board was completely against her. And instead of taking the $20,000 and running, there was kind of this inevitability that she was going to fail. And so she went forward, even though there was almost no chance of winning at that point, and she ended up losing, not surprisingly. When you look at that, if that's a real good example, a real stark example of somebody who just has negative self-talk, negative talk into the world, and they live such a negative life that they don't even see the positive opportunities, and they are ruled by their emotions instead of by their thoughts, and they're lying to themselves all the time. So my question for you is, what are you saying to yourself? What are the thoughts that pop in your head when things come up? What are the things you say to the world about yourself? Those are all things that are going to determine your culture, the way that you operate. You're creating your personal culture with that. It goes back to being honest with yourself. Are you speaking decisions based on your emotion and what you hope's going to happen? Or are you making your decisions based on looking at reality and going for the best possible outcome? Those are all things that play into that. Again, going back to organic versus intentional. That woman on that game show had an organic culture that was very poor, that was giving her all kinds of bad things happening to her in her life. Organic, another way to look at it is you allow life to happen to you, and then you react to what happens to you, and you're always playing defense. An intentional culture is you happen to life, and you play offense, and you set the agenda for what your life's going to look like. And then when bad things happen, you find the positive in it and you move on, or you study it to find out what went wrong and you fix it and move on instead of just staying in a negative place. Let's talk about some of the things that create that personal culture for you. So you have to know and intentionally live out your core values. And this is what we talked about a few weeks ago. Your core values, what do you believe? You have to know your vision very clearly, and you have to know why. What do you want to be? What do you want to become? And that needs to be a clear thing that you are moving towards. That's going to create actions that move you in towards that vision, towards making it a reality. You have to know your purpose, and you have to seek out opportunities to be working in the purpose that God created you for. You have to cultivate an attitude of abundance as opposed to an attitude of scarcity. And that comes from knowing what you believe, knowing why you were created, and knowing what you want to be. If you're very relentless in dealing with those and figuring out what those are and pursuing those, a culture is naturally going to grow around you based on those things rather than on what would come if you were just, kind of living life haphazardly. You also, who you associate with is going to shape your personal culture. If you're hanging around a bunch of people who are negative people, always talking about how they're failing and they're not good enough, and that's who your sphere of influence is, guess what? That's what you're going to end up being like. So you want to surround yourself with people who are positive, who are seeking fulfillment in their life, who are working towards being better people, who have a vision for their own life that they're working towards. Another thing to think about is your discretionary time. What do you spend your discretionary time doing? Are you sitting on the sofa with a bag of chips instead of doing something productive? I mean, that's fine once in a while, but if that's like your dominant time, or if you're spending all your time playing video games, or you're spending all your time doing things that aren't productive, that can result in your life going in a direction you don't want to go in. You should be spending your discretionary time reading and learning and trying to better yourself, moving towards your vision, figuring out what you need to learn to achieve your vision. Are you developing and building positive and empowering relationships with, bringing people into your sphere who are highly successful and highly motivated? Or are you sitting around with a bunch of schlubs who don't want to do anything but drink beer on Friday night? And I'm in the South, so you could say, shoot at cans with a gun or something. Who are you hanging out with? Who are those people? How are they influencing who you are and what you want to do? How do you behave in your moments where you're in crisis? What comes out of you when you're in crisis? Does anger come out of you, or are you the voice of reason and that calm person who helps solve problems? What happens when you're forced with a moral dilemma? Do you have your core values that allow you that decision to be already basically made, where it's an easy decision for you? Or do you sit there and struggle with going the right direction versus doing something that isn't the right thing to do? How do you treat other people? These are all things that are going to shape your character and shape your personal culture. What do you encourage in yourself and in others? If you're a leader and you're in charge of people, how do you carry yourself in front of them? What do you encourage them to do and to be? And what do you tolerate from people? What do you tolerate from yourself that maybe you shouldn't be doing? Those all shape your personal culture. Are you content with your life right now? Even if you're not satisfied, are you learning to be content with where you're at? There's a lot of people who they spend their whole life dissatisfied. It's okay to not be completely satisfied with where you're at, but if you've got core values and a purpose and a vision and you're going after those, you can be content where you are, but still have a clear idea of where you're going and what you want to accomplish. All those things, they come together to create your personal culture. So whatever you create, however your life looks because of that, just know you're going to attract more of what you created. So if you're like that girl I talked about on the game show who says how horrible her life is, that nothing goes well for her and she's always failing at everything, you're going to attract those kind of people. If you're constantly dissatisfied and miserable, guess what? You're going to be surrounded by a bunch of people who are constantly dissatisfied and miserable. All you got to do is look on social media. If you go on Facebook, you see those people who post things that they're just negative, whining posts about whatever. Well, there's a lot of people eager to jump in and share their own whining negative take on whatever that person was saying. So be careful what you're putting out to the world, because that's what comes back to you. That's what you attract. If you're someone who's always negative, positive people will not want to interact with you. If you're someone who's always positive, negative people won't want to interact with you. So it's your choice which group you want to be a part of. It's up to you who you want to be, who you want to attract, and how you want that all to play out. Having said all that, personal culture, let me just back up a little bit and talk about my personal culture that I've worked to create in my life, just to give like a real example of what this looks like. My personal culture is I strive to be a person who is a thinker and contemplative, and someone who ponders the questions in my life. The big questions about who I am and what I want to do and what I want to be. I'm someone who I always want to be learning. I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm trying to read as many books as I can. I'm looking for people who I can learn from. So I'm always striving for achievement and fulfillment. One thing I've discovered about myself as I got into my 40s is that if I don't have some goal or objective that I'm actively working towards, I don't have ambition anymore. I just kind of slide into a rut. So I know that I always have to have a goal that I'm going after. So another thing is I'm really trying in my life to live out my purpose. And I want to live out the reason that God created me. So I'm spending time focused on that and working on those things. I want to stay true to my core values. So I have the values that I've thought about, what I believe that's unchanging, and I want to use that as a tool to filter my decisions in my life. Additionally, I want to spend my discretionary time, I want to spend it wisely. I don't want to just waste time. I don't want to hang out with people who I don't enjoy being around. I don't want to hang around. I have a small group of people that I spend my discretionary time with. And those are people who I enjoy being around, people who I can bring value to them and they bring value to me. And they're people that I can learn from and people who I believe that I have something to teach as well. Also, in my discretionary time and in my work time and in my life in general, I want to serve people. I want to use the purpose that I was created for to serve the people so that other people can get better. Because I believe if I help other people get better, I will get better at the same time. A big thing for me is I always want to be content with where I am in my life, but never satisfied with where I am in my life. I want a healthy dissatisfaction. And in another episode, we'll talk about healthy dissatisfaction versus unhealthy dissatisfaction. But I want the dissatisfaction that drives me to do better, to reach more of the potential that God has placed in me. But I also want to be content, know that I've done all I can to get where I am. And I have to be content with that spot because that's where I'm supposed to be because I've given what I had to do it. All these things create my personal culture. So if you look at your personal culture, have you spent any time ever thinking about the kind of person you want to be? Have you spent time thinking about the vibe you want to give off to the world? Those are things that are worth contemplating because they're going to help you to be a better person, to be a more dynamic person, to be someone that people want to be around. And it's really going to help you build that personal culture because personal culture, most people, like I said, think of culture in terms of a business. And business culture, man, if you're the leader, your business culture flows directly from your personal culture. If you're doing things in your personal life that you shouldn't be doing or that you don't want other people to know about, it's going to show up in your business culture. People are going to know. Even if you've kept it a secret, people are going to know. So you want to be the best person you can be so that when you can speak with authority, you can speak with confidence, and that people will respect what you have to say because they know you're a person who walks the talk and lives out the words that you're putting out there. When we talk about business culture, most businesses, they have an organic culture, which, remember, like we said, organic in this case, when it comes to culture, organic is bad. Organic culture very, very rarely results in a culture that's pleasing to the leader. I hear this all the time when I listen to top personal development gurus talk about teams and about building a business. And I always hear the statement, oh, if you get great people, the culture will take care of itself. I couldn't disagree with that more. Great people you could have very talented people and they could have their own agenda coming into your organization. They could have different core values than you. They could have different goals than you, and they could be working towards their goals while they're in your business and leading other people in a different direction than where you want them to go. You need great people, but you need great people who are like-minded to you and who are sold out to going after your vision. Otherwise, you're going to develop a culture that's geared toward the vision of your people and probably not your vision. So let's talk about what culture is. One of those things a lot of people don't really know how important it is until they're in a really bad culture, because a really bad culture in a business environment is just miserable. It is no fun to be there. Have you ever had one of those situations where you just can't drag yourself out of bed in the morning to go into the office because you just can't bear the people that are there. You can't bear the environment that's there. Or you can't bear what's going on. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of a bad culture, because that's going to help you really kind of look at your organization and see if you've got some of these aspects in there. If you have a business where everybody's kind of doing their own thing and not paying attention to each other, that's a sign that you might have a bad culture. If your team has office cancers who are actively working against your vision and causing problems, that's a sign. If you have a lot of infighting in office politics, that's a sign. People who protect their turf and refuse to share or help other team members. That person who has that little job that they do that they could help other people learn something, or they could help other people by stepping out and teaching them something, but they refuse to do so because they have some sort of sense that if I hold on to this and don't teach anybody, I'll be more successful within the organization. If you have that going on, you probably have some culture issues. Team members who are sabotaging one another, trying to stab each other in the back and make each other look bad. That's a very bad situation to have. If your clients are having a poor experience because your team is working against each other at the expense of those clients, that's a sign that you've got some work to do and some things to clean up. If you have good people who are leaving your team because they're frustrated with the team and with the environment, that's a sign that you need to fix some things. And on the flip side, if you have the wrong people who stick around too long and they don't remove themselves, people who are the cancers, people who aren't doing what they should, people who are bad for your organization and they stick around forever, but the good people leave, there's a sign there that maybe your culture needs some work. If you have a toxic atmosphere in your office with lots of gossip going on and people saying nasty things about each other behind their backs, that's a sign. Here's a good one. If your admin staff, the people who have to be there every day, if they're showing up at the last possible minute or even a little late, and they're leaving at the earliest possible moment or even a little early every single day, that's a sign that they don't want to be there. And usually there's a reason they don't want to be there. And then if you have salespeople or people who don't have to be in the office every day, if you're realizing that those people are finding every excuse in the book to avoid the office as much as possible, that's a good sign that there might be an issue with the culture in your office. When you hear that list, do you have any of those things going on with your team or in your office? If you do, it's a big red flag that maybe you need to take a look at this and see if you've got things rolling the way you want them to. Here's the important point. If you are the leader and you've got a bad culture going on in your office, it's your fault. It is nobody else's fault. As the leader, you are 100% responsible for your culture. You set the tone for it. You allowed it to flourish. It grew up. Think of yourself like you've got this garden to tend and you're trying to grow flowers. And when weeds are popping up, you're just sitting back and letting them grow. So if you're a farmer with that garden and you've got those weeds popping up, are you going to blame the weeds for being there? Or are you going to blame yourself for letting them grow there? It's the same thing in your culture. If you got a bad culture, it doesn't matter if someone on your team is causing it. You're the one who sets the tone for it. So you're responsible for it. So I want to tell you about building an intentional culture within your organization. It needs to be based on core values and vision. It needs to become a force that's driving you and your team towards achieving your vision. When you're building that intentional culture and you do it right, it becomes a force that's operating kind of behind the scenes and providing momentum for the whole team towards your goals. It's like going back to that picture, that river with that strong current. If you've got those red flags in your office, you're paddling against the current. You're trying to win a race with a piano strapped on your back. Instead, when you have that good culture, you're sliding along with the current. It's carrying you along and it's pushing you forward, and you are much more likely to be successful. Why would you not want an easier road to success rather than fighting against everything trying to get there? Let's talk about creating a great culture in your organization. It's a very simple process. It's not easy, but it's very simple. So it starts, as you might have guessed from the conversation up to now, it starts with very clearly defined core values. And it starts also with a very clearly defined vision. I've been talking about these things in weeks past as fundamental principles because they're foundational to building a great culture. If you try to build a house without a foundation, that house is going to fall to the ground. It's the same thing with your culture. If you build a culture without knowing your core values or your vision, your culture has no foundation. It's eventually going to crash to the ground. So let's review real quick your core values. What do you believe? For your business, what do you believe? Do you have this laid out, written out? Can you recite it? Can you give it away to your people? Your vision. Your vision is kind of based on what you believe, and it's based on your purpose too. How does your purpose, what you believe, and your purpose play together to create this vision of what you want, who you want to be, what you want to become? And so is that vision written out and very clear where you can explain it and give it away to other people very easily? If you can give these things away to your team, you're on the road to having a great culture in your office. If you can't explain them, you need to go back a couple podcasts, listen to those again, and follow the plan to create your core values, to create your vision, get those things down, get them on paper, and own them, be able to give them away. So when you have those and they're real and they're tangible and you can explain them and they're specific, they're not real vague, then your next job is you have to give them away to your team. And when you give them away to your team, you have to give them away with conviction. You have to stand behind them and say, these are things that we're not going to compromise on. And then once you give them away to your team, you personally have to live them out. You're the example that everyone else is going to follow. If you have core values and you're not living up to one of them, well, that means that you've given everybody else in the organization permission not to live up to that core value. So you need to truly believe them. You need to give them away, and you need to hold your team and yourself accountable for living them out and for operating within the core values and moving towards that vision. You want to make it really uncomfortable for your team members who are in opposition to your core values and your vision. You want them to just really, really not feel good about things if they're fighting you on this stuff. So you want to stay strong and not compromise, and those core values, they become a set of standards that you expect your team to live up to. And that vision becomes a set of goals that everybody's pushing toward. And one of the beautiful things about having a great vision is that you don't have to make all the decisions yourself. You put your team in a position where if they know the ultimate vision, they can make decisions to move towards that vision themselves without having to run everything by you. You can create an environment where everybody's running forward together instead of you out in front dragging them along behind you. And I know a lot of leaders who just put anybody handy in place on their team, and they're constantly dragging everybody behind them instead of sharing what they're going towards, what they're trying to build, who they want to be, so that these people can get on board with following them and helping them to achieve that vision and live out those core values. When you start living out the core values and you start moving towards that vision, you're going to lose people who aren't on board with your vision and your core values. Ultimately, in the long run, that's a good thing, even when it is very painful in the short term to lose that person. If you lose a key person because they're not on board, it stinks when you lose that key person where you got to pick up the slack for whatever they were doing. But in the long run, it's a good thing because you can replace them with somebody who is going to be fully on board with your vision, fully on board with your core values, fully on board with moving in the same direction as you and moving in concert with you instead of fighting you or leading a revolt against you on your team. So when you first start with this culture that you've created, you as the leader are the keeper of the culture. In the beginning, as you're developing it, especially if you've had a team that's been together for a while and you've been really lax letting things go, and now all of a sudden you say, hey, I'm doing this and we're creating this culture and here's the core values, here's the vision, we're all going to follow it. If they've been with you for a while and they've been having free reign and you're now reining them in, they're going to test you on it. And they're going to make it difficult on you at first. And there's going to be some people who are in outright revolt that you're going to have closed door meetings with to explain to them that this is something that's not going away. So you have to keep that culture. You have to encourage and correct the people who aren't living it out to get it established. And then when you bring new people onto your team, you have to filter them through your core values and your vision to make sure that they're buying into those things before they ever join your team. If you go back and listen to the Core Values podcast, which was episode 3, I explain in there how you interview people with those core values to get like-minded people to join you on your team and to run off the people who aren't like-minded. So over time, when you stick with it and you're strong and you make people accountable to those things and you don't compromise on those standards that you've created, over time, the culture is going to take over. The culture then becomes a force unto itself, and you'll start seeing the culture correct itself. You'll have the people on the team who are sold out to your culture. They're sold out to your core values. They're sold out to your vision. They're going to correct somebody or discipline somebody else on the team who's not doing things like they should. They're going to be the one who holds people in line or who makes sure that someone who's not operating within the core values knows they're not operating within the core values. Your time to step in and deal with those things is going to be relatively minimal because the culture will protect itself. But that takes some time to get into place. It's kind of like if you're planting a tree, going back to a planting analogy, if you're planting a tree, when I first put a little baby tree in the ground, someone could come by and just pull it up real easily. Well, once that tree's been established for a year or two, it's a little harder to pull up. You still could if you tried. If that tree's been there for years and years and years, it's not coming up unless you come after it with a shovel and a pickaxe or a chainsaw or something. It's not coming out easy. And if someone's coming with that kind of work to hurt your culture, you're going to see what's happening and you're going to be able to stop it before it does damage. Culture is an incredible force. And the question for you is, are you going to flow downstream with a culture? Or are you going to spend all your time fighting it upstream and just letting it be momentum against you instead of momentum for you? I am a big believer that culture is probably the most important thing in business that determines success or failure that no one thinks about. So I would encourage you to start thinking about it, your personal culture and your business culture, and that will lead to you having more fulfillment, more success, and really to be able to move forward in a much more positive way. Well, that's it for this week. And just for a moment, I just want to thank everybody who's been listening to the podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. I love the fact that people are giving me positive comments on things and they're listening to this and telling their friends about it. If you enjoy the podcast, I would be greatly honored if you would give me a review on iTunes. That's going to help bring other people to it. And also, if you haven't already, if you would go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcast and hit the subscribe button so they come to you automatically each week, I would be very grateful for that as well. So you all have a great week, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please subscribe to Student of Life at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you go to for your favorite podcasts. Visit us online at studentoflifepodcast.com. That's studentoflifepodcast.com. We are on Facebook at Student of Life. Email us at joe@studentoflifepodcast.com. If you enjoyed the show, help us spread the word by telling someone you know about Student of Life. And please join us again next time. Thanks!